My guest today is David Burkett, a cloud security researcher with deep expertise in cloud threat detection and automation. Over the course of his career, David has built and optimized 3 different cybersecurity operation centers for MSSP and MDR providers, demonstrating his unparalleled skill in scaling security operations through automation and efficient processes. David has consulted for over 40 Fortune 500 companies and large federal organizations, helping them design and implement SOAR platforms and playbooks that enhance detection and response capabilities. He also actively contributes to the open source detection project Sigma, showcasing his dedication to advancing the cybersecurity community. Among his many accolades, David was part of a team that received the prestigious James S. Cogswell Outstanding Industrial Security Achievement Award, recognizing their SOC as one of the top 1% in cybersecurity programs for cleared facilities. He also holds a robust set of GIAC certifications, reinforcing his technical expertise in threat intelligence, cloud security, and playbook design. I've had the pleasure of knowing David for several years, and every conversation with him is insightful and engaging. I'm excited to dive into his experiences and insights on building automation in security organizations and managed service providers. Thanks for coming back on the show with us today, David. It's a real honor to have you.
Yeah, ditto, man. It's exciting to see how long that intro is getting with those accolades. Starting to feel accomplished for once.
Yeah, and I think you're probably this will make you the most recurring guest we've ever had on the show. I think this is your 4th appearance now.
Nice.
Yeah, so I appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us on so many different occasions.
Yeah, definitely.
To get started, do you want to maybe share a little bit about your background and experience in the managed security service provider space?
Yeah. So my background, you've touched on it to some degree, but I've built a few SOCs now, mostly for MDR providers. Though one of them was not for one, of course. I've done a lot of SOAR work. Specifically, I used to work for Palo Alto, working on XSOAR as a platform or as a SOAR architect. So yeah, I've done a lot in the security automation space, and I've really built a bunch of tools around this. So security automation is something I'm really excited to talk about, especially whenever how like security automation intersects with detection. That's something that I've been really big on, especially the last year and a half.
So what initially drew your attention to the potential of automation in MSSP and other SOC operations?
Well, so the first thing is I think that automation is just it's such a big game changer, just kind of in general. So like if you have a SOAR platform, I'm very rarely a tech kind of guy, but one thing that I see, or that I've seen just from my own perspective, is SOAR platforms, when they're properly implemented, they're one of the few things that really seem to be like a force multiplier, and they make automation, a ton easier, just by making sure you don't have to manage all of the code yourself, keep up with all of the APIs, you forget about even just the playbooks. That's just such a big headache in and of itself. But it's just so useful. It does everything from, reduce the amount of time it takes your analysts to investigate tickets, gives your customers more value. If you think about it from like a sales perspective, kind of makes you more sticky into the client environment, as whenever you're interacting with a client as an MSSP, the more services that they have that they interact with you, of course, the longer they're going to probably be a customer of yours. This is an area that I think is really exciting, and something that I think I'm also really interested in exploring is how we can talk about some of the LimaCharlie extension framework and how that can be used to create some pretty slick automations. One of the things that I've been trying to tell people anytime I talk LimaCharlie with them is you don't even think about it as like an EDR tool or anything. Think about it almost as like an event-driven automation platform that allows you to just deploy your security infrastructure in a really, slick way using CI/CD tooling and infrastructure as code, all that cool stuff. You guys got all the goodies.
Yeah, maybe at the end we can talk about the extension you just released into our marketplace.
Yeah, cool.
So today, what do you think are the most common operational challenges that MSSPs face? Is it just the scale?
It's not just the scale. I think also staffing, which is something that automation directly addresses. So first, one of the hardest things that I had as a hiring manager whenever I was building SOCs or working for SOCs was finding the staff, and then also being sure to retain the staff. As a SOC manager, I always did my best to be the best manager I could, but MSSPs can be um, pretty notable for having high turnover, I guess you could say. People come in as entry level, and then they get their experience, jump ship, whatever it might be. With that, having things that are like automated playbooks in place, having individual contributors that have much less impact because your processes and procedures are automated, and it's more about interacting, like what is the output, and just finding people that can take a look at that easily. That's probably what I would say on that front.
Does the complexity of managing multiple clients and environments contribute to those challenges?
Yes, actually. So it's also another good point. So one of the other kind of things is whenever you're closing a sale, especially as an MDR provider or something, um, you don't want your setup process to be long, something tedious, something that requires a lot of client interaction. So having a way to just through a few buttons, so there's very minimal interaction on your side, if actually any, depending on how you want to build out like your products. Um, it can go a long way in providing like a really seamless customer experience. But the kind of biggest thing that you'll see, and one of the things that a lot of MSPs, especially smaller ones, struggle with, is keeping consistency in client configurations. So whenever you're, let's say, an MSSP, you might be managing EDR or firewall, whatever it might be. Sometimes it can be difficult to make sure you're deploying a consistent configuration across all of your environments, and B, making sure that those configs are meeting some of your minimum expectations. So that's another place that automation can really help. And again, something that LimaCharlie does specifically is work with their your infrastructure as code kind of plugin that can make that a lot simpler and easier to kind of get automated and stood up. So yeah, that's definitely another kind of piece to it. And one other piece that I did want to actually talk about is just handling you kind of touched on this a second ago about your scale and scaling issues. So one thing to kind of keep an eye out for, I want to make sure I just don't forget this while it's on mind, is whenever you're looking for kind of a SOAR or automation platform, one thing that I saw specifically with a couple of MSSPs that I consulted with, not just built, is whenever you're doing stuff with a lot of different clients, that can scale or tax your SOAR platform hardware pretty heavily. So you should very much take that in mind. And whenever you're doing any sort of evaluation with some kind of automation tooling, if you're not building it in-house, be sure to keep that in mind and kind of ask how well they scale, because sometimes you might have a flood of incidents from 2-3 customers at a time. That's hundreds or something of alerts. Maybe it's just a bad rule or something, and that can just really overwhelm a SOAR platform really quick. So sorry, long side tangent.
Yeah, no, it's great. Great information. What are some of the best practices for implementing automation in MSSP operations?
Some of the things that I think that are going to be kind of important in that front. So whenever you're working, so you want to have a good source code management repository, but you also, one of the things that you don't want to forget about is what makes SOAR type tools and automation good is being able to take the task that your end analysts are working with and translating them into automations. What happens a lot of times when companies, go to implement SOAR platforms is they basically just become a standard security automation kind of tool. And the team becomes like an isolated kind of quote unquote security automation team. But the big benefit of low code platforms is bringing that expertise as close as you can to your end analysts. So there's not any loss of translation whenever your end analyst is maybe describing requirements to the person that's building the automation. So one of the things that I think is really important is being sure you can embed them in some way, or at least depending on your SOAR platform's licensing, try to give them access to be able to build their own playbooks, even if they're being implemented by another team. You don't want to lose kind of the real benefit of low code. And that is kind of the big piece, being able to bring automation to those that can't typically do it themselves. So again, you don't lose that domain knowledge that they might have in translation with the developer. So that's something that's also really important to kind of understand when approaching the automation for MSSPs.
Is there any frameworks or best practices that you could recommend MSSPs use to balance automation with the need for human oversight? Like you're talking about bringing this technology as close down to the analysts. how do we make sure that it doesn't get killed at the last second?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. I've not really delved into kind of frameworks, surprisingly, to help maintain those. I would actually probably assume following your standard software kind of framework and building out things using user stories and ensuring that maybe you're an analyst that might be building playbooks, they might not be the ones doing the automations themselves, understand the importance of building things like user stories and that kind of was the agile dev process. That's something, I had to teach myself as someone that didn't learn kind of more formally. So one of the things that is really helped me is kind of being able to take some of those user stories and turn them into like, requirements for like a product or maybe even an automation in a playbook. I think that's something that's really important to get across to the people that are going to be interacting with the
So making
automations
sure you
themselves.
develop that institutional knowledge as you put these processes and automations in place so that everybody's aware of what's happening and how things are supposed to unfold.
Yeah. Yeah. I think most of the traditional kind of, like development frameworks will just really apply because at the end of the day, you're still just doing software development. I think the most important piece is just being able to get the end user as close to that automation as possible. Or the subject matter expert, rather.
Yeah. Are there any common pitfalls that MSSPs encounter when adopting automation? Like if somebody's sort of approaching this for the first time, are there things that they should watch out for?
Yeah, so I touched on this a little bit earlier, but the scaling issue, it's it having a SOAR platform can be a scaling challenge in itself if you're the right size organization. Whenever you're running automations and multiple playbooks, probably concurrently from multiple clients, you really need to take that into in mind whenever you're developing your initial architecture. That'll go a long way in saving you pain long term. So that's kind of the big piece that I think I would look at.
So the state of things today are early days. How do you see automation evolving in the MSSP space over the next 5 to 10 years?
So the MSSP space, whenever it comes to automation, to me still feels a little less mature than whenever you're purchasing and managing a SOAR product yourself. You don't have all of the same kind of capabilities as the end user of an MSSP's kind of SOAR platform, and a lot of that's just by design. They don't want you to do something too crazy within their own platform, right? But I think there's going to be more maturity around just that in general. Bringing that capability to develop their own playbooks in a lot more robust manner, and having that exposed to their end users is going to be probably the future. And yeah, I think that's really going to be where it's going. Just making that kind of taking what is there now and just improving it, polishing it, giving the end customers what everybody else might have of a non-MDR provider.
What role do emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning play in the future of MSSP operation, in your opinion?
Ooh, so I have a lot of really fun kind of ideas on this. There's a few different ones. So sticking in the role of like kind of SOAR platforms, I think that there is a lot that can be done in terms of kind of breaking down what's going on in an incident. Now, you got to be careful with that, of course, because some analysts that might not know the difference between right or wrong can potentially take a hallucination, for example, as being fact. But where it can really come in handy is it can really speed up an analyst's ability to understand like a PowerShell command line if they're not super familiar with coding, that kind of a thing. So it can really break down and lower that barrier to entry. I also think that there's some stuff that people aren't thinking about from a passive perspective. So everyone's trying to force LLMs to do the cool things like, actually do the investigation itself, do that really hard and serious kind of work. One of the things I think that they'll really excel at, especially in the role of cybersecurity and in the domain of detection and detection engineering, is doing kind of passive kind of quote unquote code reviews. So as people submit new detection opportunities, enforcing things like proper grammar. So like maybe having an active versus a passive voice in your detector descriptions, ensuring that the detector description descriptions actually meet reality whenever you're pushing them out. So like, for example, the regex doesn't, maybe isn't too over permissive. You can catch that potentially with LLM. So that becomes like a non-blocking, hey, here's some things that we kind of catch. It's also not critical. It's not going to be one of those things where like, if it makes a mistake, it's going to be the end of the world, could mess up your investigation kind of a thing. So I think kind of non-blocking real passive things like that are going to be the area where I think LLMs should really be most applied first, personally. Even if they are kind of unfortunately being applied kind of the other way, where they're trying to do the full investigation currently, I think that's a mistake. But hopefully in the future, as they mature, that becomes much more accurate and less of a pain to try to identify when there's an error.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. LLMs are great, but they're not for mission critical stuff. And I think it's still really important to have a human in the loop to make sure there's eyes on whatever's being pushed through by those things.
Yep, exactly. Totally agree.
For any MSSPs just starting their automation journey, do you have any advice you would give them to ensure that it's a smooth transition?
Yeah. So one thing that you're going to find out is if you don't have your processes documented ahead of time whenever you're going through automation, or the process deviates from what it is documented, you're going to find that out pretty quick. So one of the good things that you can do as you're getting prepared for it is to start working on what your processes actually are if you don't have great documentation around them. And let's face it, almost all of our documentation could typically improve. So getting those kind of up to snuff, and then really kind of prioritizing and thinking where you think your clients would get the most benefit with your service as an MSSP. Each provider focuses on something different, or maybe a lot of the common things, but where your clients are mostly using their services, look to see how they can best use some of the automations in your tools to do what they're trying to do with the service that you're selling. I think those are going to be the two places you're going to want to spend your time, especially before you go into getting an automation tool. If you have those going into it real well understood, you'll have a great way to use. You'll have like an idea of, hey, I want to start here. This is where my client will have the most payoff, and then you can just really kind of branch out easy, and you won't have a lot of debates and meetings and potentially arguments over processes, procedures, while you have the tool and you're waiting for it to go live, get your return on investment, and all that kind of be hammered out beforehand.
Right. You'll have a nice clean list of things that you can look at and just kind of check them off one by one without all that internal.
Yeah, exactly. You're going to have much less of a headache whenever you start going through that process.
Are there any resources or communities you'd recommend for those interested in learning more about automation and MSSP operations?
Yeah, so I don't have any, and specifically, I typically recommend sources like less so Twitter these days, but still Twitter or X, Blue Sky, and just keeping an eye on some of the SOAR and automation based hashtags. I don't know that there's really a great singular place. A lot of the tool providers have their own Slack communities. The LimaCharlie Slack being a great example of a place you could go to talk shop. But those are probably going to be the best, is whatever tool provider you're using, their individual communities and kind of what they're doing, and they'll have typically texts and stuff in there that can help out too with ideas. So that's generally kind of the best bet.
Very cool. And I mentioned that we could touch on it at the end. You recently made a extension of the LimaCharlie platform that's available in our marketplace. Do you want to quickly touch on what the problem is you're solving, how the extension works to deliver your technology, and what the benefits of this kind of thing are?
Yeah, so a few things. We touched on this a little bit, but the LimaCharlie extension framework is really awesome for just automating anything in general. It really sets it up so that you don't have to you don't have to manage any of the managing different accounts or even really states. You can have a totally stateless app that just upon an event gets some data, does something, returns some data. Don't have to remember organizations or any kind of databases, building authentication. It's just so simple to deploy. So I mentioned that because once you see how simple it is to build a LimaCharlie extension, it'll really open up to what you can do as far as response processes with your LimaCharlie tools. And anything that generates an event in LimaCharlie can then have something quote unquote done to it as an action, which then you can do something with a LimaCharlie extension call, some custom code to do something, and you can exchange those to even some degree to get some really smart and advanced things. Now, it's not going to be like a full-blown SOAR platform. I don't think you guys are trying to be, but it's one of those things that's just so powerful. And I think people are only going to just start to see the capability that it offers. And I hope that they can see that through my extension, for example. So I created an extension that's in the marketplace now. It's called the Celestial SH Scanner. So the idea behind it is it's doing some TLSH scanning for you. So I've done a few things. If you're in the Intel channel in the LimaCharlie Slack, you'll see that I have created a tool that tracks pretty much every single open source attack tool, C2 framework you can find, and it creates a TLSH hash on them. I have something like 98 total tools, pieces of malware that are being monitored. I'm adding more to that kind of all the time, but the idea being I'm doing the managing the hashes and doing the distance calculation for the users of LimaCharlie. So anyone that's using the binlib framework, where you're collecting a unique binary, every single binary that'll get sucked up will be compared against a fuzzy hash, looking for similarities of like 100 known attack tools, like Sliver, C2 frameworks, you name it. And then if there is a similar match or something within a user-defined distance, so you can adjust the false positive rate as much as you want. And there's a great kind of, what do you call it, like spreadsheet, I guess you could say, or table rather, that I've included that will show that kind of false positive rate. So you can actually just say, hey, I want less than 1% false positives, and just kind of put in that score as being the max distance you want, and only get an alert if you see that max score. Now you can also take the opposite end and throw that score really wide and get distances for all kinds of stuff, but that's going to throw a ton of events into your ingest, and that'll be where you start noticing some ingest costs. But the idea of it is doing that TLSH distance comparison, which is something that you can't really do in a lot of other tools. For whatever reason, it's so powerful doing that fuzzy hash comparison. And I'm really excited to see how well it works for just the community in general. So if you do use it and you get a detection, I'd really be interested in hearing about it if you can talk about it publicly.
Yeah, I'll make sure to link your contact in the show notes. And for listeners, the TLSH hash that David's talking about is sort of I think it's fairly new approach to comparing hashes to known malicious ones, but it allows for some of the code evolution that happens in malware. So it comes back with a confidence score, I believe. So this thing isn't exactly like this thing, but is close enough that we think you should look at it. That's sort of the TLDR, right?
Yeah, exactly. The idea being, your adversary, a regular hash, an adversary can either just change by, changing some simple strings in the thing that might not even be transparent in the application itself, or just by nature of hard coding IP addresses or whatever it might be, just change for every single client or target that they're using. This will look for and really identify those kind of simple code changes, and it'll do a few things that'll kind of force adversaries to use other kind of obfuscation methods, which then becomes a detection method in and of itself, of course. But it'll really kind of force them to raise their bar and make sure they're actually not just using kind of stuff off the shelf. They're doing some pretty heavy changes in customization to some of these open source tools to make sure that you're not detecting them, so that they don't evade that fuzzy hash. One kind of funny story that I'll tell you while I was building the extension itself is I was building the extension, and whenever I was doing my testing, I was like, man, why can I never get a perfect 0 score match? Like, it's always 30, it's always 40, whatever it might be. I tried all these different binaries, and then dumb me, I was building out the condition to essentially bail as soon as it met a fuzzy hash match of a certain distance, of course, just like the app's built. But any version that I would use, it would hit on a version sooner than mine, and then bail because, that would come out. And I just couldn't figure out why I couldn't get that 0 score. So it gave me a headache just trying to almost evade it in my own. So just really funny kind of anecdote.
Yeah, very cool. And I love to see these community contributions. And also for listeners, you can also have private extensions. If you decide to build some technology that you don't want to share in the marketplace, it can be completely private to your organization.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome, man. This has been a great conversation. I got the last one for you that I ask of everybody that comes on the show. It can be as wide or as narrow as you want. Do you have any predictions for the future of cybersecurity?
Man, I'm never good at this one because all of my predictions never come true. So I will say yes, and I think that I still think that one of the big things that's going to become more and more prevalent is insiders assisting attackers through things like getting finding like insiders at telcos to pay off to get people's phone numbers to do things, like um, just SIM swap them or something to that effect, or maybe just disgruntled employees. They don't like their job. Attacker says, "Hey, do you hate your job? I'll give you $50 if you give me your password." And then they do it. I think there's going to be more and more an increase of that, and I think that's something to look out for.
Yeah, I was just talking with a fellow the other day about this very thing. He was saying that LLMs and other AI tooling being applied to monitoring social media accounts of employees at large companies to identify people that are in financial distress and things like that. So it's a really interesting vector. Yeah, because I know that some research that was done at the University of British Columbia near where I am was able to determine somebody's sexual orientation from like 3 social posts. Like just as a research project, which is just kind of scary that information can be extrapolated from, benign postings that you're making on social media. So it's definitely a strange world we're heading into.
Yeah, no kidding. I think as a practitioner, I wouldn't want that implemented just because I wouldn't want it used on me.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's a little bit terrifying, and just be careful what you're posting out there because the world's getting a little bit strange.
Yeah, I think with LLMs, one of the things that I have a concern about is I think it'll be harder and harder to be forgotten just on the internet as your content's kind of ingested and stored and trained on data. I think that it's going to be the stuff that you out there is going to be, you always grew up saying, which post on the internet's going to be there forever. And then archive.org goes down. Everybody's like, no, it's all gone. So
yeah.
I think that's going to be more of a serious issue. So yeah, that's something I think people should keep in mind.
Awesome. Well, on that note, sir, thank you so much for coming out again. I always appreciate talking to you and hope we get to do it again soon.
Yeah, man. I love being here. Happy to join you anytime.
Okay. Thanks, David.